I've always been intrigued by very successful people. I think most of us are. There are some who carefully plan their lives, almost from the moment they hit grade school. Admirable, but not always interesting. Then there are the explorers, who see adventure or opportunity pop up and fearlessly reach and ride it for all it's worth. Nashville real estate developer Mark Deutschmann is definitely that kind. He's got a Hemingway-style backstory, complete with being lost at sea in bone-chilling waters.
I started drifting out to sea. The whales went the other way. The water is so cold up there that if you fall in, you'll die in 12 minutes. And there's all these currents that will turn you in circles. And if you're stuck and you don't have any control, it's not a good thing.
Once he landed in Nashville, he seemed to find a great blend of planning, strategy, and risk that has paid off in a very big way. This guy has done more than most of us would ever consider trying, and he's not done yet. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner & Company. Your story is really one of the most colorful and adventurous that I've ever heard. No one expects a real estate guy to commune with whales and juggle his way through Europe. And, sometimes do you find it hard to believe all the stuff you've done?
Yeah, I mean, life gives you what you get, right? I mean, it just seemed like life has been a lovely adventure. And from being a preacher's kid and, living in a collective and having an uncle who was a civil rights leader, to hitchhiking out to California, to getting a job working with killer whales out of school, which was wonderful. And then, of course, taking up juggling along the way is a wonderful piece. But yeah.
Hopefully we'll get to all of that.
Yeah.
But let me first ask you about your childhood. In a planned community, in a non-traditional educational system. Talk a little bit about it.
We moved to Columbia, Maryland when I was probably 13 or so, and it was a planned community. It was a James Rouse community who did Harbor Place in Baltimore, and they were looking at what they thought was a smart plan for a city with the central village and central neighborhood commercial district, with the neighborhoods surrounding, with the central schools and places of worship and everything. For us, it was an interesting adventure. My brother and I each got paper routes, and we were in a new city, so we could go out and sell papers to all the new residents for the Washington Post. And we were superstars. We were superstars, entrepreneurs, salespeople. But the one thing that stands out to me is the way they built that city. You can get on a greenway from every little village in every neighborhood, and you can get out. Like, they built the city thinking about access to nature and then access to bikeable, safe travel, which has impacted me today.
Yeah. You never really needed a car?
I didn't drive, but we could do a lot of things in our own community. Like, we had the little neighborhood village with the swimming pool and the whole thing. The interfaith center was a half mile away, grocery stores, everything was there. My school was very close as well.
Did your parents seek this out, or was your dad positioned there as a pastor?
My father had become the director of American Missions for the American Lutheran Church when we moved up to Virginia, and he ended up seeking the city out. I think they heard about it, and we moved from Virginia to Maryland again when I was 13 years old.
And the school was kind of a novel idea, too.
It was called Wild Lake High School, and I started in 9th grade, and we had learning activity packages, so every student was on their own. They could go wherever they wanted at any time. You could come into essentially a particular subject, and you could spend your whole day there if you wanted to. So I really gravitated to the sciences back then, so I'd stay and do science stuff, but you didn't have to go to school. And so we spent hours playing soccer out in the field. And I think 90% of the students in that first year failed. People did not advance because they didn't get their laps done, their learning activities done. So it's funny.
But you managed to work in the system? Did you enjoy it?
I did. I mean, I liked the freedom. I could leave school whenever I wanted to. I could do what I needed to do. And I ended up with my different kinds of groups. I had my little sports group. I had my my intellectual, the folks that I hung out with in, the science labs. And then I had my ne'er-do-wells that I hung out with.
Well, that creates a well-rounded young man, doesn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
Do you think it made you a little bit more fearless than most kids, too? You were managing your own time and you were making your own choices.
Yeah, I think, that and possibly a sister. My sister, Mary Ann at the time, but Maggie, she was a bit of a rebel, as preachers' kids are. So she rebelled.
That is the rule, isn't it?
It seems to be the rule. And since my dad was the director of American Missions, we'd end up hanging out with all these other preachers' kids. We'd end up seeing other churches that were starting and realized that, oh, I like these preachers' kids. They're all real rule breakers. So maybe that helped too.
How much older is she?
She's 2 years older. Mm-hmm.
That's a good spread.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you end up finishing school there and going where?
I finished high school at Wild Lake High School, and then my family and two other families, when I was in 11th grade, we moved to the edge of Columbia, and we decided to move into something called the Homewood House, and it was a big Civil War house built in 1864, and it was sitting on 12 acres surrounded by 2,000 acres of fields and farms. And one of the families was the preacher of the Interfaith Center and his kids. And then it was, for the parents, it was called the Order of St. Martin. They were thinking about sort of this community of people who had same religious type of background. For us, there was 5 of us who were in that 13 to 16 range. It was like, oh my gosh, the freedom that we had out there was unbelievable. And it was a very interesting community and collective, but it was a lot of interesting conversations between the adults and the teenagers.
And then was there pressure on you to go into?
No, nothing like that. I mean, I think what happened for me is my sister had hitchhiked out to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, sometime when she was 16 or 17, and worked on an Indian reservation. And I think I was inspired, and I ended up hitchhiking out to Berkeley, California when I was 17, and ended up being on the road for about 9 months. That's where I learned to juggle. I ended up working in a co-op. Then I hitchhiked and worked at a ski resort for a little while. Then I poured concrete in Gillette, Wyoming. I ended up just hitching and finding freedom and seeking rides.
Wow. How did you learn how to juggle?
Well, when I went to Berkeley, there was a person living in the house that I moved into. His name was Jeff Ross, and he was a leather maker out in Telegraph Avenue. And he'd do that, but I quickly learned that he was also a master juggler. And I think he was in the Pickle Family Circus. And so he could do all sorts of things. And I thought, that is cool. That's a good skill. And so I started learning. And I thought, well, this is a great skill for hitchhiking, because you can stand there on the road and you can juggle and you can do all these tricks, and who wouldn't want to pick you up?
Are you amazed by the guy who juggles like running an entire marathon?
It is amazing. I think they call that joggling, not juggling.
And
so,
gotcha.
Yes, people who can, run a marathon juggling. Some have done it with 5 balls, I believe.
What's the most bizarre combination of things that you've successfully juggled?
I could, in my prime, juggle 7 balls, 5 clubs, and pass 8 clubs with 2 people with triple spins. And I think the thing that I was really good at is feeding people, where you stand and you pass to a whole group of jugglers, and you're receiving everything from all of them, but you're also doing your own tricks as you receive them. So just the basic props were the best for me. But I did have a Danger Man routine, and it was after a David Bromberg song, Danger Man.
Yeah.
And I juggled fire. In the song, I juggled fire, machetes, glass bottles, and even I had these fake machine guns that I juggled. So every time the Danger Man refrain came up, I would juggle the danger stuff. And then in between, when the good riffs were going, I was juggling lots of balls.
Did you make money that way?
No, I didn't make money with Danger Man. That was more of a Showtime thing. Yeah, I made money doing shows and did a lot of things in Nashville when I got here, sort of for the music industry. I ended up getting farmed out to the music industry and doing these bizarre little, little tiny shows sometimes. Like, I'll tell you, one of my most interesting stories was I was asked to go juggle for the CEO of Sony, and it was his 40th birthday. And they said, you're just going to go in, you're going to do like a 5 to 10 minute skit. It's his birthday, but just take some props in and do something. And so I decided, well, it's only a 5-minute skit, so I'll take machetes. And I took these machetes that were
sharp,
36 inches long, and they are sharp. And, they have handles that are a little short, but what I would do with people, which is sort of crazy, is juggle them around their body. So I'd reach around them and I'd juggle the machetes in front of their face. And I got into the room, and it was tightly packed, and it was not a place for machetes. And he was probably a foot taller than me.
Uh-oh.
And so I was like, okay, how do I manage this? And I ended up getting a chair and standing up on the chair. And, I'd sharpen the knives and I'd get him ready. And then I reached around and I juggled around him. Well, the funny thing is, he came into a project that I was selling, 20 years later. And he walked in and he said, hey, I'm Jim Ed Norman. And I said, oh, well, sir, I owe you apologies. He got a kick out of it.
It was a memorable birthday anyway.
It was a memorable birthday, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you one more juggling question. Can anyone, regardless of coordination, hand-eye coordination, and athleticism, successfully juggle?
I'd say yes, but for me, I've taught thousands of people how to juggle, and I can pretty much see who's going to be an easy teach. Somebody who, when I show them the first round, who's going to get it, and then those who are going to be harder to teach. And I could teach anybody how to juggle, but some people are going to stick at it and get it fairly easily. I can get people juggling in 2 minutes, or it could take them 4 hours, and some people aren't going to put in the time to get it.
Gotcha. So the science kid comes back. When you're out west, you decide to legit go to college, right?
To legit go to college. Can you believe it? So I went to, when I finished hitchhiking, I actually went to the University of New Hampshire for a couple of years. And then I took off another year and went to Europe and hitchhiked through Europe. But then I decided to go out west, and I was looking for a school that had marine zoology. I was looking for something. I was attracted to the marine sciences. And Humboldt State University in Northern California stood out, and I ended up in Arcata, California, which is very close to Oregon. Beautiful, beautiful place. And so I got a degree in zoology.
And what was the aim then? Just to gather the knowledge, or did you see yourself as Jacques Cousteau Jr.?
I don't know that I really had a great plan. I ended up getting another degree in Spanish, which has actually been more useful for me over the years. Yeah. But I think what happened, and I'll say one more thing about juggling. I was out in Arcata Square. There was a group of jugglers out there, and I was juggling, and this redheaded guy came up, and he was very excited, and he says, "Oh, I can juggle too." And he came up, and sure enough, we passed some clubs together, and he was an okay juggler. In my senior year, I saw an ad to work with killer whales, and it was like he was looking for interns to work with killer whales, or this person who was interviewing. And when I went in to do the interview, it was that redheaded guy. And we were like, oh my gosh, and I got the job. The job was 1,000 miles north, 300 miles north of Vancouver, up in the Johnston Straits, which is very wild territory, up in northern Vancouver Island. And I would drive all the way up there, and then I had a Zodiac. I had this 12-foot little boat, and I'd unpack it and pump it up and everything, and then I'd go out for 7 or 8 months with the whales. So it was like really May to October there was about 150 whales who came in between May and October to feed on Chinook salmon and to have their babies and just to be community, and that's what we were studying.
Wow. Did you know them by sight and by sound?
That was what we were doing. We were doing a photographic identification study, and so you started learning about the characteristic dorsal fins and saddle patches of each of the whales, and it was pretty early in that study. We ended up learning that it was a matriarchal society, like basically dominated by a matriarch. The males would move from pod to pod and, whatever. But there were some favorites, Sharky, and, there were some that you could see from afar and some that were more difficult to identify. But they traveled in pods, so there'd be smaller groups of 10 or 12 whales, and you'd find the characteristic pod that had their own sound. Each pod had their own characteristic calls too. So you could start, if you dropped a hydrophone, you could hear which pod it was before you might see them. And then you'd be ready to take pictures of left and right side to put it into the catalog as they needed.
This sounds like dream work.
Yeah, it's good. It's good work if you can get it. But I think I decided that I wasn't a very good scientist.
Why?
I think, it seems like with sciences, you have to start studying smaller and smaller things. If you're going to make a difference, then you have to figure out something that nobody else is doing and go deep into it. And my brain didn't work that way. And
You're
so
a big picture guy.
I just started thinking I need to try something different.
You mentioned the Zodiac boat, and I don't want to not ask you about your emergency at sea. Mm-hmm. Because in a way, it plays into the way you get to Nashville, right?
True. At the end of the second season up there, it was late September, and I'd packed my camp up. And again, it's a 12-foot rubber boat with the 35 horsepower Johnson, so it's a small little boat. And I was heading to pack my boat up into my truck to drive back down to Arcata, and I came upon a super pod, which is 30 or 35 whales, which is unusual in any circumstance, but very unusual this time of year. And so I slowed down, and they were going my way. I put my boat in low gear and climbed up to the front and was saying goodbye to my friends and taking pictures and doing the whole thing. 45 minutes later, I looked back, and my engine was smoking. And I ended up jumping back and pulling the cover off, and I watched my electric system fry. I'd sucked up something into the intake, and it burned my engine. And I started drifting out to sea. The whales went the other way. The water is so cold up there that if you fall in, you'll die in 12 minutes. And there's all these currents that will turn you in circles. And you say if you're a victim, if you're stuck and you don't have any control, it's not a good thing. But I had brought a windsurfer up that year, and I had it tied to the side of the boat. And I thought, I'm going to have to ditch my boat and try to surf somewhere.
In this icy...
Yeah, but I decided instead to try to rig a sail, and I used the sail and I rigged it on my Zodiac, and for 9 hours I sailed towards what I thought was an island that there might be humans. And I did. I mean, it was a harrowing experience, but I landed on that island and walked in, and indeed there was 2 humans there. One was a guy with long hair and a long beard and his hippie girlfriend. And I was stuck with them, and they were stuck with me, which turned out to be a sweet thing, because ultimately in 1985, I came to visit that long-haired guy named Joel Solomon in Nashville, Tennessee, and I never left.
Wow. What time of day were you in this nautical emergency? Was it still light out?
Yeah, the one good thing about the north is that the days can be very long. So it was probably the morning, and by the time I landed on the island, it was approaching dusk, but I did not have to travel at night.
What was Joel and his girlfriend, what were they doing on this island?
There was a a place called Orca Lab, founded by Paul Spong, and they were really they had a whole bunch of hydrophones, and so they were doing science of recording the whales and learning about their vocalizations, and so Joel was just placing the hydrophones. They were up there. Joel's father. They all came from Chattanooga. So Joel and his father and family came from Chattanooga, and Joel had gone out west to find his whatever he was doing, and he ended up on Orca Lab doing what he was doing. And there's a whole journey since then, that happened that got him back down to Nashville, but it got me there too.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. We'll be right back.
Hey there, it's Dr. Sanjay Gupta with some exciting news to share. CNN is now streaming. That means you can read, watch, and stream everything in one subscription. You can watch news live 24/7. You can also explore catch-up videos and explainer videos, and you can also watch a library of CNN's originals, including my latest documentary, It Doesn't Have to Hurt. Just go to cnn.com/all-access.
You were also wanting to explore social responsibility among your workforce. Give them a sense of giving back in a way?
Yeah, I think I would, Joel Solomon was part of something called the Social Venture Network, and it was a group of businesses that were using business as a tool for change. So you had Ben & Jerry's and, Stonyfield Yogurt. You had the owners of these companies who came in, but they were using the business as a tool to do something for the community.
No one had done that with real estate, though.
No, and it was like I was selling real estate, but I started thinking, well, what am I going to do? What can I do to give back to the community? And that was sort of the impetus to start Village. Like, if I use Village as a tool for social change, then I can start shaping the neighborhood. So when I started the company, I actually gave 5% of the Village Fund to the Village Fund. It was to a nonprofit called the Tides Foundation out in California. I gave them a piece of the company because I thought, a founder is going to make money if they pay dividends, and the shareholder is going to make money if they pay dividends. And so the founder is always going to want to give dividends. And so if I pay a dividend, then the Village Fund's always going to get its 5%. And so, that became the basis for using Village as a tool for change.
You were one of the first people in town that really saw an old landmark structure and decided this needs to be saved and not razed to the ground. We're talking about the Werthan manufacturing. They made burlap bags, right? Yeah,
and it was a cotton mill before that. So
really?
Yeah. I think Werthan Bag Factory had been in there for 100 years. And the way that happened is that, back in the early 2000s, you were starting to see condominiums. You were starting, everybody had been asking for lofts. People moving down here from New York and San Francisco, they would say, hey, do you have any lofts here? And it's like, no, we don't have any of those. How about a nice bungalow in Hillsborough Village? And
yeah.
That was what we could give them. We could give them an old house, but not a loft space. And we had started something called, we had started a division at Village that would sell multifamily residential for developers. We are starting to think the developers are going to come here and they're going to begin to build condos and things are going to happen. And so we ended up selling 8.9 for affordable housing resources over on what's now Rosa Parks. Somebody saw that and invited us to take a look at the Werthan building. They were thinking about developing it. And so I had 30 agents through the building. We were pretty new at Village.
Was it empty at that point?
Yeah, it was. There were a few little quirky things happening in there, but it was virtually empty. And it was 400,000 square feet, so it was a big empty shell of what it is. We got invited in to take a look at it, and they asked if we could sell it, and I was like, yeah, we can. There's a lot of people who would love this kind of thing, and this is while the lead-based paint is dripping off the ceilings and the floors are pockmarked and there's pigeons everywhere. And this is when the plan of Nashville, the Civic Design Center was beginning to think about the plan of Nashville, and they were having these charrettes all around the city. They held a charrette at the Randy Racy Center, which is an MDHA building across the street from Werthan. And I saw the community looking at the maps of what they wanted in their neighborhood and making recommendations for what they wanted. And every table had circled the Werthan building and said artist lofts or something to that effect. Everybody wanted it to be housing. Well, I got in there, and the developer that we had looked at it with didn't materialize, and I just got obsessed with it. Like, somebody's got to do this. And so why not me? And so I ended up starting a development company called Core Development, and we ended up tackling that project, in 5 phases. It took us a while.
Yeah. What was the biggest obstacle, or what turned out to be the biggest problem with a structure that old and that gigantic?
I think the original problem was who's going to lend us money to do, we can't do the whole project, and I didn't have the resources to borrow it, but we ended up, the person who owned the building apparently was in default on their tax increment financing loan. They had some money that they had borrowed to help take care of some of the problems with the buildings, and for whatever reason they were late. And we ended up going to the bank, and the bank that had that loan and said, you can either take back this whole building, which they didn't want. It was a what MDHA called a blighted neighborhood at the time, or you can give me $6.5 million to do a first phase of 23 units in this project. And so we had designed this little section of the old mill, which is the part built in 1872. And they ended up giving me a loan to do 23 units in the midst of this huge complex, which is a little insane in a way, but they did require that we sold all the units in advance.
And that happened?
And so what we did is I worked with a group called Polifilo, an architect group, and David Powell, who's with Hastings, was there. But I went and got all my loft buyers, people who had bought those nice bungalows in Hillsborough Village that really wanted a loft, and I pull them in, and we did these little charrettes, and we almost let them design a development. And I found 23 buyers who bought into it, and that's how the project got started.
So that was like the proof of concept, and then once people saw how incredible.
That's right. Then second phase, we did 27 units, and then the third phase, 36 units, and then we had to do a bigger fourth phase because we did 120 units, which, you're asking about challenges. We started doing that in 2007, and we, fortunately, with a big project like this, it was the most debt I'd ever seen.
That's got to be scary.
Yeah, and I thought everything's going great coming into 2008, and then you realized something's going on. Something's not right.
Yeah.
But we had sold 103 out of 120 units, and we ended up getting done early, which is unusual, and we were under budget. And so by the time the bottom fell out with the Great Recession in September or so, we had already closed 80 units. And so we were in pretty good shape to get out of the bank, and it sort of saved the day. And I said I was selling multifamily I was selling the Icon in the Gulch, Rolling Mill Hill, 5th and Main. I watched other developers who were late and trying to close after September lose their shirts, So not everybody survived the Great Recession.
You may not know this, but do any of the original Werthan buyers still live
A lot
there?
of them do.
Really?
There's original buyers there who would never give up their unit because they're custom and fantastic. And we gave them some bonuses, like the people who lived on the first floor, we had a room downstairs, sort of sub-level, but with light. And if they bought on the first floor, they had the right to develop down. And most of them have, so they got free space to develop. And those who lived on the top floor had the right to develop the attic space. And so they went up. And so people have got these classic units, and they're still there.
Wow.
after all these years.
And I know you did other landmark buildings, the home of the old Banner.
Right. The old Banner. How about that? That was, we were working with Phil Ryan, who was the head of MDHA, and Bill Purcell was the mayor at the time. And they had helped us for the fourth and fifth phase of Wortham. We got tax increment financing to help out with some of the lead-based paint and other things we had to take care of. We were in that project, and the city was sort of shifting and starting to think that maybe it was time to allow housing downtown. And you had 84 vacant or semi-vacant buildings downtown, including the old Banner building. Somebody had bought that building and was going to tear it down, and they were going to create another parking lot down there because the Banner building had had a fire, and the building next door to it had burned back in the 40s or 50s. But the top floor of the Banner was burned out, and, there was possibly a reason why they would want to tear it down. But they asked us to come in and evaluate it, and the city gave tax increment financing downtown, and we were able to buy those buildings from that owner, and we ended up creating 47 loft units at Printers Alley and Church Street. So we saved that old building.
Is there a Nashville building that did fall victim to the wrecking ball that you wish had not?
I think I came a little bit. There were definitely buildings that were getting torn down as probably in the earlier 80s that really shouldn't have. But I think, I don't know, it feels like we were starting to see people appreciating the character of the old buildings downtown. And there definitely was a market. If we did the Crest building downtown, we did the Art Avenue building, we did the Church Street Lofts, we did a series of buildings downtown, and there was definitely interesting demand in these classic old structures that was like the city was ready to receive homeowners.
It's Banner and Company. And my guest is real estate developer and Hall of Fame entrepreneur Mark Deutschmann. We'll be right back. As we sit, the East Bank project is taking shape on paper and, the stadium. What do you think of that, and what worries you about it, if anything?
Well, I think one of the things that, excites me, it's like, wow, it's a really interesting canvas. Nashville has an amazing brand, and we've done a lot as a city to elevate the brand and, get worldwide attention. Which city has a canvas like this that can come in and be redone, for economic development? Not too many. That's an unusual. So that's interesting to me, and I'm happy that somebody's bought the PSC metal plants. That's interesting to me as well. The thing that worries me the most is that all the resources go to the East Bank, and you forget about the things that we need to do in the neighborhoods that exist. And so I'm a big greenways guy. You might ask about it, but like, for instance, we're proposing a 31-mile loop in and around the city, and some of it is going to use an old rail in North Nashville, behind the Lent Center on Charlotte. Well, let's make sure we get that funded, because that's going to be really important for the neighborhood. And we've got this other greenway that would come in and connect 12 South to Geodis, on Browns Creek and the 440 Greenway. Let's get that done, because it's serving existing neighborhoods. So don't divert all the resources to the East Bank. Make sure that we're taking care of, our multi-ethnic communities on Nolensville Road, and think, the transit thing is a good thing for us. At least it shows that we're caring about the neighborhoods that exist now.
Yeah, so many people are worried that Nashville is a place now where only rich people can live.
Yeah, affordability has been challenged. And I know, I tend to think in terms of attainable housing versus affordable housing, which means I would prefer to serve the workforce and core development with our projects. We've always seemed to gravitate to that.
What is the key difference between attainable and affordable?
Affordable might be at 60 to 80% of the median income. when we were doing tax increment financing, like at Werthan, we'd end up selling 20% of the units to people who made between 60 or 80% of the median income. So that would be the affordable category. And then the attainable housing would be the rest of it. But we tried to keep price points that were attainable for people throughout the workforce. I guess I believe in the American dream of home ownership. I mean, that's maybe old school at this point, but I think that there are a lot of people, at least in my career, who've created significant sort of multi-generational value by buying their own homes. And, people who are in business, I've helped people, buy property that turned out to be extremely good buys for them. So,
give us your best pitch. I can't believe our time is waning here, but give us your best pitch for exploring the greenways, and how far can one go now if you wanted to go from A to wherever the end is?
Well, we now have 111 miles of greenways in Davidson County.
That's a long walk.
It's a good walk. When I was the president of Greenways for Nashville under Carl Dean, we laid down 40 miles. But we are doing all of the minor rivers out to the edges of the county. Now we have the most challenging but most important piece of the greenway system that's going to be built with the city central greenway. And that's the 31-mile loop with spurs down through the city that will connect to the densest of Nashville's neighborhoods. And my opinion is people are craving connection. People are looking for that kind of access to schools, to community centers, to jobs. And it's particularly needed in the urban neighborhoods because that's where people live. So if you get the benefit of taking cars off the road, but you also help with mental health and physical health and all the other good things that greenways will provide.
Have you been on every inch of what we have?
I think so. I mean, we made it a point during COVID. The greenways were a godsend at that time, so people could get outside. We had our granddaughter, and we ended up getting bikes and going out to some of the greenways that we never had walked before. So yeah, and I'm pretty good at diverse greenway walks. I love doing the walk and talk, and I'll take people out to a greenway anytime.
Is there any section of that greenway plan that had to be created or manufactured, or did it kind of naturally lay itself out?
Well, a lot of the minor rivers naturally lay themselves out, but it's like a puzzle. You have to get your easements with homeowners, and you have to figure out, sometimes you have to build a mile and then another mile, and then you fill in the gap. That is way more challenging when you get into the urban core because you have businesses and easements. And for instance, the Browns Creek Greenway runs by Geodis. It would come from 8th Avenue past Geodis, and it will go all the way down to the river at Rolling Mill Hill. That will be an amazing challenge, but when we get that done, it's going to be something. It's going to be something noteworthy for our city.
And what's the time frame on that, in the best possible world?
Well, if I had my druthers, I'd like to get the whole city central greenway done in 10 years. And I think that Nashville is hungry for it. And I think what I'm finding is that philanthropy is ready to give to it. I think there's corporate ready to give to it. We just have to make sure that we put it together in a way that allows people to support what's a really important asset for our city.
Yeah. Takes you back to your planned community you grew up in at 13, right?
I guess things have a way of catching back up with you, don't they?
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. This episode is produced by Steve Haruch and edited by me. The original music is by Verlin Thompson. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. Our final question is in the fishbowl, and it's been posed by someone who was in your chair before. I can't tell you who. We'll have to find out. Do we have one in there, Steve? Yeah.
That's funny. I've listened to a couple of your recent podcasts, And so I'm wondering if it's either of those two. It's either a clown question or it's a coffee question.
Ooh. Could be.
Okay, this is a stumper from Liz McLaurin. Is chili
a soup or a stew?
really? I would I'd just call it chili.
Good answer.